I would like to welcome you to the BSBI series, Open Series, as we call them. This is an initiative that we have designed, all members of the academic faculty, in order to open the school to the audience and to the public. And today is a very important day because we want to remember what John Fitzgerald Kennedy did in Berlin exactly 60 years ago with a famous speech in the Sonnenberg Rathaus. And I have with me my colleague, Dr. Monica Klein, which is also the head of the Faculty for the Creative Industries. And together we are going to have a discussion, an exchange of opinions, what this famous speech is going to say to us 60 years later and why it is still important. Monica?
Thank you very much. Yes, so this is this significant anniversary this year. We are celebrating 60 years since the Kennedy came to Berlin and said, I am Berliner. So maybe first of all, we will talk about little bit about what happened in the 60s and what happened after the Second World War in Europe and in Germany and in Berlin.
As we know, after the Second World War, Berlin was divided into 4 different areas. And we had the, let's say, British, French, American, and Soviet control, different parts of the city. And at the same time, Germany was divided into the West and the East. And Berlin, back then, it was like an island. And there was a corridor that used to unite the western part of Berlin towards West Germany. So this island, as you understand, it signified back then, because we were talking about in the middle of Cold War, an island of freedom and independence. And still, although after the unification of Germany and the destruction of the wall, still for us that we live in this city is still apparent. And we can experience the same historical vibes every time we walk around the city. And the falling down of the Berlin Wall also signified lots of things for all the communities and the people that were oppressed. And also changed completely the world. And that was probably the biggest and the most decisive step towards the end of the Cold War. So that actually ended the polarization, but from the end of the Second World War until the falling down of the wall, there was a polarization. And you are from Poland, which is a country very close to Germany, and actually I think it's faster to travel to Poland from Berlin than go to Düsseldorf on the other side of Germany.
That's true.
And Poland and Germany and also my country, Greece, are a member of the European Union. And what we're experiencing now, it was completely different 60 years ago when Kennedy, this particular day, visited Berlin, and definitely much more different 80 years ago, where we all know what happened. And it was amazing because when Kennedy landed in Berlin back then in 1963, everybody was out on the streets. Everybody, all inhabitants of Berlin, of West Berlin, they were out. And from my research on this speech, I discovered that he actually, when he saw the audience and the crowd and the people, and start meeting them and greeting them, he changed his speech, the actual speech that he had prepared to do. And I think this journey, this trip to Germany, actually changed him also. And it was a pity that just some months later, he was assassinated. So maybe that was one of the last international trips he did. So what are your views regarding this polarization?
No, so in the 60s, and the Kennedy arrival to Berlin was the consequence of building this physical wall, because, this ideological wall was already created for more than 20 years, but then the physical wall was built in Berlin. And it was a consequence of that he came and he wanted to bring some kind of power and encouragement to the people who are living in the West Berlin, bringing them this, also the hope that they will be not left alone. So this is also very important, that they were encouraged that what they are doing, this freedom, democracy, is the things that they will never ever give up in the democratic world. And this polarization, as you mentioned, like even though right now we are living in a free country, Berlin is a free city and it's not divided anymore, this polarization is still visible in our ideology. And why it is happening, why we are so polarized, this is big question that maybe you can have an answer for that.
And one of the main reasons that I wanted us to have this discussion, especially for this speech, and why it's still relevant today, it's because I really believe that this division, first of all, it's symbolic, and I will explain what I mean. And the second is that any division for me in our days is mainly internal and not external. And any division, like also good and bad, are within us, not outside us. This is one of the famous phrases of John Fowles, which is a writer that I really admire. But why it is symbolic? Because the island of freedom, let's call Berlin with this term, back then, it symbolizes all the minorities, maybe all the countries, all the groups of people that they still experience this kind of isolation, but they keep their flags high. And that for me also means all the kids or all the young people that they are not allowed to an open and free education, those that they cannot express their political views, those that they belong to special minorities, or those that in their own countries they cannot exercise all the freedoms that we have. And especially young people today, and in Europe in particular, they take for granted many things that even our generation, since we're a little bit older, let's say, we were lucky because we experienced this transition. So we know, for instance, how the European Union was like before the 80s, if we remember a little bit. And that now you can get your passport, you don't even need a passport if you have an ID, and you can travel freely. And it's like from Rome to Berlin, like you travel from Berlin to Hamburg. So it doesn't really matter. It's like an internal trip. Yeah. I remember my first trip in Europe when I was 14. I even had to declare my photo camera on my passport for tax reasons and, for these bureaucratic rules they had back then. And I want to be honest that initiatives like the Erasmus, for example, or the Lingua program, for me, they changed my life. And this interaction with other people, this multiculturalism, and all this ethnic homogeneity in Europe, it only brings positive things. Of course, although I don't want to lead the conversation towards the European Union, but it's important because it sets the exact area that we are now. It started as a revolution. And if you think that after 6 years of the Second World War, the European Coal and Steel Community was created. That means they united the industries of war, which is coal and steel. Yeah. And which were the 6 founding members? France, Germany, Italy, and the 3 Benelux countries, that they used to fight each other just some years ago. That was by definition a revolution. It wasn't easy. And that revolution, of course, all these years now, inevitably, it became like what we call a regime in international relations. It was inevitable. All revolutions and all innovative ideas, they start like this. Then you need to rediscover yourself. Or as I say, you need to go 2 steps back in order to go 1 step ahead. And I like the fact that we keep the basics. And coming back to what Kennedy symbolizes, even in Europe today, there are areas that they are isolated. And there are differences between the North and the South. And there are differences not only in the financial aspect, but also in the mentality of people. Yeah. You have here the poor North and the rich South, and why we need to give more funds to the Mediterranean countries, and so on, and it goes on like this. But the fact that, and what united all these people all these years ago, were solidarity, prosperity, and the urge to rebuild Europe. So it was really difficult to picture what was the situation in 1963 when Kennedy was here, but just a glimpse from the past. Some years before he came, there was a blockade in West Berlin.
That's true, yes.
And that means people, they didn't even have the necessary
Food,
means
yes.
to support themselves.
Yeah.
And then there was a huge project with Dakotas and big airplanes throwing food, and this took place for a long time. So imagine how these people felt when some years later, let's say the leader of the free world visited them in an open way, which today would be probably
impossible
let's
because
of all the security measures and everything. But it meant something for them. And that's why at this point, I want to read to you and to our audience the actual speech. It's not long, but it can give you an idea of the spirit and of what he wants to project outside. So, President Kennedy, he said from the balcony of the Sonnenberg Rathaus, which was back then the parliament of West Berlin, "I'm proud to come to this city as the guest of your distinguished mayor, who has symbolized throughout the world the fighting spirit of West Berlin. And I'm proud to visit the Federal Republic with your distinguished chancellor, who for so many years has committed Germany to democracy and freedom and progress, and to come here in the company of my fellow American General Clay, who has been in this city during its great moments of crisis and will come again if ever needed. 2,000 years ago, the proudest boast was civis Romanus sum. Today, in the world of freedom, the proudest boast is Ich bin ein Berliner." So I appreciate my interpreter translating my German, President Kennedy said. There are many people in the world who really don't understand, or say they don't, what is a great issue between the free world and the communist world. Let them come to Berlin. There are some who say that communism is the wave of the future. Let them come to Berlin. And there are some who say in Europe and elsewhere we can work with the communists. Let them come to Berlin. And there are even a few who say that it is true that communism is an evil system, but it permits us to make economic progress. Let them come to Berlin. Freedom has many difficulties, and democracy is not perfect. But we have never had to put a wall up to keep our people in, to prevent them from leaving us. I want to say on behalf of my countrymen who live many miles away on the other side of the Atlantic, who are far distant from you, that they take the greatest pride that they have been able to share with you, even from a distance, the story of the last 18 years. I know of no town, no city that has been besieged for 18 years that still lives with the vitality and the force and the hope and the determination of the city of West Berlin. While the wall is the most obvious and vivid demonstration of the failures of the communist system and all the world to see, we take no satisfaction in it, for it is, as your mayor has said, an offense not only against history, but an offense against humanity, separating families, dividing husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, and dividing a people who wish to be joined together. What is true of this city is true of Germany. Real, lasting peace in Europe, which can never be assured as long as one German out of 4 is denied the elementary right of free men, and that is to make a free choice. In 18 years of peace and good faith, this generation of Germans have earned the right to be free, including the right to unite their families and their nations in lasting peace with goodwill to all people. You live in a defended island of freedom, but your life is part of the main. So let me ask you as I close to lift your eyes beyond the dangers of today to the hopes of tomorrow, beyond the freedom merely of this city of Berlin or your country of Germany, to the advance of freedom everywhere, beyond the wall, to the day of peace with justice, beyond yourselves and ourselves, to all mankind. Freedom is invisible, and when one man is enslaved, all are not free. When all are free, then we can look forward to that day when this city will be joined as one, and this country and this great continent of Europe in a peaceful and hopeful globe. When that day finally comes, as it will, the people of West Berlin can take sober satisfaction in the fact that they were in the front lines for almost 2 decades. All free men, whenever they may live, are citizens of Berlin, and therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words "Ich bin ein Berliner." So you understand that some of these notions and concepts are still with us today.
Yes.
And that's why I said it's symbolic, and it applies to everybody that is deprived of basic human needs and human necessities. And if we focus on education, because I think this appeals to all of us, and that can be also a speech that could be heard in the United Nations General Assembly as well. We as educators, as he was a politician in his field, we need to do whatever we can in order to make education more accessible to everybody, and to those they are not privileged enough to enjoy this. And I'm very happy to note here that a couple of years ago BSBI endorsed a small community in Africa, and we try to provide them some of the means in order to continue their education. But this is nothing in comparison to what we still need to do. So in our globalized world, or in our deglobalized world now, there is a tendency that that people return to the notion of the state again. So we have experienced all these globalization fora around the world and all these big international communities and alliances. Now, maybe as an aftermath of the pandemic, or because that cycle has reached an end, people are returning back and look
To more local.
to more local and regional entities. And I think if we take this into consideration, and if we also try to use some of the spirit of this speech towards our own audience, our students, and our communities, we can draw some conclusions, and we can move things forward.
Yeah, because polarization, as you just mentioned in the very beginning, is very dangerous, because it creates the opportunity for those who want to be in power, and the polarization is based on the stereotypes, on the bias we have, on the fear we have. And as you mentioned, education can be this can be the bridge, and can, as in BSBI, for example, we have so many people coming from so many different countries, bringing different attitude, different culture, different approach, different language, but they are together under one roof, united.
And for me, and let us close by,
Yes.
by continuing what you are saying. It's we have the privilege and also an experience that for me is above everything, to live, work together, and create together with people from nearly 100 different countries, literally under the same roof. This is not easy, but maybe some people, they have no idea how regenerated this is for us. And every day we learn something new. And this also keeps us young and fresh.
Yes.
So I want to thank our audience. I want to thank you, Monica.
Thank you, Professor.
And that is something that we all need to keep, this message of this famous speech. And thanks all for attending.